everyone, and welcome back to PCA's Garage. It's Tech Tactics Live, episode 59, and it looks like we've got a great crowd with us tonight, and it's probably because it's a topic that many of you have asked us to cover, and not only the topic, but the presenter that I'll introduce here in a bit. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the 997.2, or more specifically, the 2009 to 2012 911s. A little bit of housekeeping. Of course, we want to thank Pirelli, our sponsor. Without them, none of this would happen. And also, if you wouldn't mind, if you enjoy what we do, be sure to click that like button. Be sure to subscribe. Comment. If you're watching live tonight, we're monitoring the live chat area. You can ask questions of each other. You can also ask questions that I'm going to be monitoring here with my laptop and my cell phone, and we'll ask the experts. So with that, let's go ahead and bring in Diane Sullenberger, Potomac Region President, and more importantly tonight, the owner of this 2011 997.2. So Diane, come on in. And for those of you, you may recognize her voice. She's been on the PCA podcast. Obviously, if you're even remotely active in Zone 2 or the Potomac region, you know her very well. You may have seen her at the track, but let's just throw up the agenda first, and then we'll get into her car. So 997 ownership experience. That's where Diane's going to kind of give a little bit of input there. We're going to talk about why the 997 is such a popular choice. And then we'll go into the specifics of what's the difference between the 997.1 versus the .2 car. What to look out for when you're buying one, and then what are the many variations that a 997.2 comes in, and what might be the most desirable. And so with that, I'm going to introduce him, although he's probably going to sit tight for a little bit. When you're talking about variations, market, you know, people have asked us, where has he been? He's been busy making other videos for us, and that's the owner of Columbia Valley Luxury Cars, but also Valuation Tech Committee member, Nathan Merz. Hey, Nathan.
Hey, Vu, thanks for having me on.
You got a new haircut style? You got this whole beard thing going.
Yeah, well, it's real laziness, you know. If I showed you my feet, I'd be wearing flip-flops, if that means anything.
Oh boy, how many minutes did we make it into the video before we brought in flip-flops? That's an inside joke. But anyways, let's move to the beautiful car that is in front of us here, this 997.2. I don't know if you guys can see it. Maybe Damon will start taking some photos of it or video of it. Obviously, this is your track car, and I know you spend a lot of time at the track. Is this your dedicated track vehicle?
It's a combination of street and track, but it's mostly track.
Yeah, and I can tell with the, we'll go into some of the hardware of it, but why 997.2?
Yes. This is my third Porsche, and all three have been 997s. This is my first 997 and I really love the 997s in general because I think it has that kind of quintessential Porsche look and styling, plus the modern technology. And it doesn't have the extra weight and all of the extra electronics that the 991 and the 992 do. So I think the 997 for me is a really sweet spot. And I loved my 997-1S manual, and my goal was to learn how to heel toe shift, and I was good, but I wasn't super proficient at the track, so I really wanted to switch to a PDK, and I love that this car has the PDK. I love that it has the higher horsepower, and it has more modern technology.
And that's where you're going to make a lot of people jealous, especially when you come to like considering it in comparison to a 996, right? They brought back more of the traditional Porsche styling. You're getting a bump in horsepower, a little bit nicer interior, but then you don't go too far with the next generation of 991s where they're a little bit bigger, yes, you know, and such as, like you said, the sweet spot. Interesting that you talk about, you know, going from a manual to the PDK transmission. In 2009 is when the PDK was introduced for the 911. And as much as I love rowing my own gears in my 996, but if I used my car the way you use your car at the track primarily, PDK is where it's at.
Absolutely. It is just so much faster. And it's just flawless. You know, by the time you think about bumping a shift in the paddles, it's already done it for you.
So what else about the 997, why did you also choose 97.2 versus 1?
Just some of the styling, some of the little things too, just the upgrades. I do like the LED tail lights. Boo and I have been debating that.
Oh no, I'm being called
we'll
out.
leave it up to the gentle
Nathan, I'm
readers
literally
to
being
decide.
called out right now because I said to her earlier, I appreciate you bringing the car, but the one thing that I probably will say about this particular car is the white taillights. And I know it was really in vogue in 2011, 2010. Well, I'm not saying it's not now. I'm just saying for me, like that the whole LED look was kind of controversial, and I like them smoother. I believe that what you have is an option, and then the standard taillight is just like a solid red ring with the maybe just call me conservative. Maybe that's the whole reason why I like it. But yeah, don't hate me for saying that.
One of the things I think we will agree on, though, is just the interior styling too. Then dials, the temperature, and
The
the fan control.
durability
Oh
of
my
the
gosh.
materials on the inside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The fit and finish is much nicer than the Gen 1.
Now, how about you switched out obviously to fixed seats or race seats and harness because of the amount of time you spend on the track. Suspension-wise, this is a GTS, but is it still GTS suspension, or you've upgraded to something else?
It's upgraded.
It's upgraded. Okay, very good. And I noticed this car, a GTS, typically comes with center lock wheels, but your car has studs.
Yep, I was lucky enough to get my GTS with a center lock delete, which, a lot of people love that look, and I love the look too, but in practicality, especially for a track car, and to be able to take the wheels off more quickly, the wheel studs are the way to go.
And I think this is like a proper track spec because you also don't have ceramic brakes, where
Correct.
it would have been an option or could have been an option for this car.
Yep, and that would be very pricey
Yeah.
for the track.
So other than suspension, is everything else stock, like powertrain wise?
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
and then I've seen you drive, so it's plenty of power to get you around the course.
It is plenty of power.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for bringing it. I'm going to switch over to Nathan, and we're going to share more details on 997 and .1 versus .2.
Excellent. Thank you
All
very
right, we'll talk to you in a bit. So Nathan, what do you think of this ride?
Oh, I think it's spectacular.
Yeah.
Although, I do have to, support Diane a little bit because our viewers need to understand that your metric for gauging taillights is the 87 to 91 Mustang GT with the cheese graters. So,
Which
in my opinion, it doesn't really
so the
count.
cheese graters on my GT, I immediately took off when I brought it home from the dealership and I installed LX taillights on my GT.
Okay. You're earning some esteem in my eyes. Okay, we're okay then.
So here's the thing. So we're doing this show for 997.2s, and of course we would like to have one in the garage, but it was kind of hard for us to find an owner in our area that didn't have that had a 997.2 that wasn't a GT3 or a turbo, I wasn't even hoping really for a GTS, just a standard 997.2. Why are they so hard to come by?
Well, they're hard to come by predominantly due to the economic climate here in the U.S. between late 2008 when they would have been introduced and 2012. We were kind of in the doldrums of the Great Recession. And so if you're out shopping for one, you'll find 2009 is the most common year because, of course, Porsche planned for production probably in 2007 and 2008 and rolled these out for 2009 model years. But if you go back into this period, in fact, one of my great regrets is I walked into our local Porsche dealer in 2012, and they had a leftover 2011 GTS, and they were offering it for $30,000 off.
What?
Right? Can you imagine today getting any modern Porsche for $30,000 off sticker?
That's
But that just
make-believe.
tells you that people were worried about their homes and their jobs, and they weren't generally buying new Porsche. And so pretty low production years across the board.
All right, well, before we get into the details of .1 versus .2, let's just talk about the ethos of 997.
Yeah. It probably bears saying because both Vu and I are passionate 996 owners. I own a bunch of cars, but I also have a 996 that I love. And so, what really happened with the 996, of course, is that Porsche people, we don't like change. We're kind of stuck in the past sometimes. And so when the 996 came out, I think the 996 is a gorgeous car, but it caused some controversy because it was so much change. And I also think that time is judging the 996 more favorably than it maybe did in period. And so there was a lot of that kind of brouhaha about the 996 styling. And clearly Porsche heard that, because when the 997 came out in 2005, they really dug deep into the Porsche historical design cues and pulled out things like the traditional 911, eyes, I'll call them, the headlights, right? They went to a round, traditional 993-esque headlight design as compared to what people pejoratively call the frying egg in the 996. So that was a big difference. The other big difference you'll notice if you sight down the sides of a 997, it's a more masculine shape. It's a flared. I actually, one of the things I like about 996 is they're slab sided like an early 911, which I think is pretty. But yeah, check out the flares. Now this car, it's really accentuated because being a GTS, it's the wide body, but they got the more flared look. And so, if you look at both the motoring press, the enthusiast press, and the general public, when the 996 came out, it was more of a mixed reaction. And when the 997 came out, it was a universal applause. Like, hey, Porsche really nailed the design of this car.
Mm-hmm. So what about, when, as you said, being a 996 fan myself, and I've spent some time behind a 997. I don't think I've ever driven a .2 car, but I've certainly driven a .1 car. And don't kill me for saying this, but I feel like that generation going from, I have a 99 996 that to me feels pretty raw. When I drove the 997, it felt more refined, but it also felt a little less engaging. But is that me trying to,
It's probably a little bit you. I mean, one thing to really remember is that you can lump the 996, 997.1, and 997.2 in a family because they share the same platform. Mm-hmm. So basically, each of these are revisions of the same basic platform. Whereas, for example, the 991 introduced an entirely new platform.
Right.
So if, for example, you come out of a 996 to a 997.1, I would say it's, from a driving experience perspective or performance, it's, quote, 10% better, right? It's not a marked change. And if you go from a 997.1 to a .2, it's another maybe 10% better. Whereas if you drive, for example, a 997.2 to a 991, because they're a completely different platform, it's not so much a percent better, it's markedly different overall, right?
Gotcha.
And so how you feel and interact with the car changes radically. So, for someone who's owned a 996 or a 997, if they jump into a 997.2, they should feel immediately at home with just the dynamics of how the car behaves and feels.
So from the jump from the 996 to the just general 997, they're sharing the same platform. Was there anything other than the headlights that I think most people notice? Was there anything lost when it went to this 997?
I don't think there's anything lost. I mean, a lot of it comes down to, I guess, probably preference, right? I can tell you, at least for me, when the 997 came out, I was very, very happy. I thought it was, at that time, I viewed it as a much better looking car, and I enjoyed particularly the improvements on the interior. The interior felt more akin to how I thought a Porsche should look and feel. But again, it's kind of weird because in retrospect now, 20 years later, I look at the 996 with maybe a different set of eyes, which is obviously weird because I have the same set of eyes I was born with. Yeah. But it does change a little bit. But I think, to me, I don't know that anything's really lost. I think it really boils down to, some of us, if we own a car, I mean, it's kind of funny, if you jump on a forum or if you're at a Cars and Coffee, most people will argue that the car they own somehow is the best version of that car. It's probably bias.
Yeah, sure. All right, so let's delve now into .1 versus .2 differences.
Yeah, so the body shell itself is identical. So the body shell itself didn't change. And so if we start with like exterior differences, this was a refresh that Porsche spent the majority of the budget on mechanical items. And so the aesthetic changes are just simple bolt-on parts. Headlights, taillights, bumper covers, mirrors, door handles, that kind of stuff, right?
Yep.
But the basic body didn't change. So that's, again, a lot of manufacturers will do that. It saves money on a mid-cycle refresh. You're not changing sheet metal, right? On the interior, the basic design also stayed the same, but they changed most of the stuff in the center stack. So the biggest thing people notice is the PCM improved markedly. So for example, it's the first generation to have Bluetooth. Now, of course, the oldest 997.2 is now upwards of 15 years old. So, we sort of laugh at the quality of the PCM screen, but it was pretty good for 2009. And it's 1,000 times better. I mean, my number one beef with the 997 generation is that ridiculous phone keypad.
Oh yeah.
It just dates the car so badly. Whereas this one looks reasonably up to date. And they also improved the quality of the switchgear. In particular, you'll notice it on the climate control.
Mm-hmm.
They still can peel. I'm starting to see some that have some peel, but on 997s, it's almost universal that they peel.
The dot ones suffer badly from it, right?
What's that?
I said the dot ones suffer badly from the AC controls peeling.
Oh, yeah, it's an eyesore. If you have one of those, please fix it. It's pretty straightforward. There's actually, my guess is we've probably done an FAQ or something on that, but it's a simple change. But then little things like, I do love the steering wheel update. The 997.1, particularly, they have this ugly triangular steering wheel I can't stand. I really like this sport design wheel here.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's gorgeous.
Uber sexy, and it can be retrofitted to a .1. It takes a little bit of coding, but you can make it work. So, the biggest changes, of course, come mechanically.
I was just going to jump in and just say, when I saw her steering wheel for the first time with the yellow marker, I thought she had the wheel rewrapped, but in fact, it was already Alcantara as the GTS package, and she did the yellow marker tape, and she did it nicely. It looks pretty cool.
Yeah,
I know it's there for driving purposes more than looking cool, but it still looks cool.
Hold on, I got someone at the front door, believe it or not, Vu. So I got to just tell them I'm on a live recording.
Is it your Amazon truck dropping off stuff?
No, it's my customer. I'm at his house.
Nice. Well, folks, if you're wondering if we're really doing this live, yes, we are. All right, so you were going to go into the mechanicals, because that's where the heart of the changes from a .1 to .2 is. Yeah, so the biggest change, of course, is in the motor. Okay, so as we know, the 986 Boxster debuted the first generation of the M96 motor, and a derivation of that motor powered all Boxsters, Caymans, and 911s all the way through the end of 987 and 997.1 production, which is 2008. The normally aspirated cars, right? Turbos and GTs still use the Mesker-based motor, but the normally aspirated cars use the M96 and M97. And the 2009 introduced a whole new family of motors called the 9A1, which we still use today, basically that same family of motors. And so the biggest changes are that people get super excited about is they don't have an intermediate shaft. Well, if you don't have an intermediate shaft, well, then you no longer have the potential for an IMS bearing failure. So that's something people get pretty excitable about. So that's item one. They went to direct fuel injection. And one of the other things that I sort of like about these generation of cars is they actually went to a shorter stroke. And so similar displacement with a shorter stroke means they're more rev happy. So you give them direct injection, give them a higher red line, make them more rev happy. And then they gained, the base car went from 325 horsepower to 355. And the S went from 355 to 385. And then if you're cool like Diane, you get a GTS and you get the power kit, which is 408 horsepower. Nice. And we were talking about this earlier, 408 horsepower with this type of weight on a modern street car, like that's a fun power to weight ratio to have, where you can really enjoy driving it on the street without getting into too ridiculous of speeds or acceleration.
Yeah. And then of course the next big change is if you're a two-pedal driver, it was the transition from the Tiptronic transmission, which is a standard 5-speed torque converted automatic, to the PDK, which is actually truly a manual transmission that's hydraulically shifted, right? And it's 7 speeds. And so the best way to basically understand this would be that the Tiptronic if you look at it just objectively, posted slower performance numbers and was not an additive benefit in terms of absolute performance on the cars. Whereas the PDK, in terms of absolute performance, in this generation, a PDK powered car or transmission car will outperform a manual transmission car in every instrument test. That doesn't necessarily mean it's the best choice for any given driver, but if you're just talking objectively, it's an improvement.
Between the 09 to 12 years, does the PDK transmission in them remain the same, or are there improvements year after year?
There's some minor changes. The basic transmission itself stayed the same, but since it was a new introduction, they're learning, and Porsche is very good about introducing engineering changes as they come along. So there were several software updates during that period of time. So oftentimes, if you have, for example, an 09, if it had been to a dealer, it would already had some of the updates. One of the probably bigger hardware changes is they had some complaints in hot climates about failure. So I think sometime in 2011, the PDK got a third radiator. So the later cars have better cooling for the PDK than the earlier ones do. But you can retrofit that third radiator if you don't have one.
Very cool. So let's just jump into a couple of questions here, unless you had more you wanted to talk about .2.
Sure.
So here's a question from Francisco Silva, and I think we even did a recent PDK video on it. He says, what's the field experience with the original PDK? What's their expected service life? And what's the recommended sort of maintenance schedule?
Yeah, so I mean, first and foremost, I would highlight that we did a PDK specific tech tactics, I think just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, that's about PDK repairs, right?
Yeah, I think probably worth watching because they're going to be more of an expert than I am in the actual teardown and mechanics of it. What I can tell you in the field in terms of experiences are overall, the transmission has proved to be very robust. For many years, we saw almost no failures. And now we have to remember these cars are getting anywhere between 14 and, upwards of 15 years old for the oldest ones. So we're starting to see some of the failures on some of the higher mileage cars. Although where it gets a little tricky is that the failures usually it's not mechanical, it's usually electrical. It's sensor related, and Porsche as a company is not repairing them. So if you bring your car to a Porsche authorized dealer and it has a significant PDK failure or code for a failure, the only option they will offer you is a straight replacement, which is going to run close to 20 grand. So it's a pretty expensive proposition. But we are starting to see some third-party vendors look into doing some of the repairs, and I think that previous tech tactics is worth watching. But the failure rate is not particularly high, but it is not zero. And it is also still a mechanical device, and they still actually do have clutches. They have 2 sets of clutches in them. And so clutches is a wear item. So at some point, given enough time and enough miles, you're going to see an issue with the PDK, as you would with a manual transmission's clutch.
So in a PDK, the clutches that are in it, like any other clutch, will wear out. But if you have to replace those PDK clutches, it is a all or nothing, unless you go to a specialty shop that will rebuild a PDK.
Exactly. So authorized Porsche answer is strictly replacement.
Okay.
They just ship you a new gearbox from Germany, and you give them a nice Amex swipe for 20 grand, and off you go. But thankfully, there are some people really delving into this because, it seems ludicrous to me, for example, to throw away a transmission that needs a $1,000 sensor and pay 20 to replace it if you can fix it for a couple grand, right? It just seems wasteful to me.
Yeah, the market will help find a better solution if you don't want to replace the whole thing, I would think.
Yes. And I do want to make sure we don't paint the picture these things are unreliable.
No, it's
again, overall they've proven to be quite robust. Yeah.
So being familiar with the market, what are you finding in terms of 997.2 cars? What's the percentage of they are PDKs versus they are manuals?
The majority are PDK. Unlike, for example, in the 997.1, the percent that are Tiptronic versus manual is probably 75% manual. And this is just speaking off terms. This is not official numbers, but it's probably 75-25 manual to automatic.
Uh-huh.
When you go to the .2, it's almost the exact opposite. And this is driven by two things. First, when the PDK came out, the press came out and universally praised it, right? And so a lot of people adopted it because they were told it was better. And the other thing that happened is right now, a good chunk of Porsches are ordered. Customers order what they want. If you think back to 2009 to 2012, the bulk of the cars were pushed by Porsche to the dealers because people were not ordering new cars. And so Porsche got to control really what the spread was. And they were a fan and an advocate of the PDK. So they probably pushed the majority of the inventory to the dealers. And they made the decision about the matrix of what percent were going to be PDK versus manual.
Interesting. Oh, here's a question. That's pretty interesting. Thank you for doing this. Can the power kit be added to the 3.6 cars?
Oh, to the 3.6 car, I would say no. Nor would it probably be the most cost-effective way to go anyway. But yeah, no, it would be. I mean, the one thing I will say about like the Porsche factory power kit stuff is it's very inclusive. It's not a simple thing where they just bolt on, an air intake and a software tune. I mean, it's a pretty large list of items, especially considering they get, what many people could consider to be modest gains. I mean, I sort of chuckle. We won't name some of these said companies, but you can look at in the aftermarket, they'll claim, "Oh, put an intake, a tune, and an exhaust in your car, and you gain 60 horsepower." Well, that's garbage. That's just not true. You can see how much work Porsche goes through to do. In this case, they added 23 horsepower, and the list of items they changed is pretty significant.
Here's another question talking about DFI, and if you can explain why DFI is considered, making the engine more robust or more durable.
I actually don't know that it makes it more durable. It does a couple things. It's more efficient, so you get better mileage. So I think one of the number one reasons manufacturers went to direct injection, well, there's probably two major ones. Fuel economy is probably first and foremost. So there's a 10% improvement across the board with fuel economy from .1 to .2, and that's predominantly due to direct injection. And the reason that direct injection, frankly, gets better mileage is that you have better control over fuel spray atomization, and so you can run a higher compression ratio. And a higher compression ratio is more efficient. So that's one of the big ways they do it. The other thing is because it's more fine, it's better from a emission standpoint. So, of course, manufacturers are always scrambling to achieve the corporate average fuel economy as well as reduce emissions. So it's not, I wouldn't say it's an issue that the motor's going to last longer. In fact, it does introduce its own set of problems, which is in an indirect injected motor, which is everything prior, fuel is sprayed back and it basically washes across the back of the valves and cleans all the carbon off of it, sort of by de facto. In a direct injection car, you don't have that same because fuel spray is sprayed directly into the cylinder itself. So we don't see, I'm not seeing a ton of carbon buildup in this generation of Porsche, which is kind of surprising. I don't know what strategy they used, but if you look, for example, at similar era Volkswagen Audi product, they carbon up something significant.
Okay, so we're right about 8:30 right now. What I thought, since we have the car here, and sort of our next segment is what to look out for when shopping for a 997.2. Maybe we start from the front of this car and walk our way back to things that, let's say, you were looking or considering to buy this car. Maybe walk us through things you would notice or not notice. And and for those of you that are online live, I'm going to have my phone with me, and I'll monitor the chat in case you have a question while he's checking this car out. Yeah. So here we go. Here's a 2011 997.2 car that has definitely had track duty.
Yeah. So one of the things I'll do before we even get into this specific car, I'll just point out that the PCA has some great YouTube content that's really delves into kind of doing inspection. You'll see me. I just launched a video, I think, for the 987 recently launched. So, and a lot of things that would match for a 987 will be similar to a 997. So if you want to go a little more in depth, that's a good way to do that. So, but yeah, starting at the front, I mean, a couple things that are common to this era of water-cooled Porsche that I'm always looking at. The radiators are fairly exposed in these cars. Kind of they hide under the marker lights there in the front. And so, a lot of people will go to like a grill screen. And it looks like she's got grill screens, which is a good choice, particularly on the track. This stuff is thrown up at high speed. They can puncture the radiators, the coolers up front. But the biggest issue is they just get packed full of debris and all sorts of stuff. So I want to be inspecting in there. You can also check a lot of these cars, because they are fairly low, do suffer quite a bit of frontal impact just from parking curbs and stuff. Much of it ends up being aesthetic, which it just depends on whether that bothers you or not. But I actually want to look for structural damage. You can actually have some pretty significant structural damage just by running over something, a big parking curb at speed or something like that. So I want to inspect for that. Headlights on these cars like to fade and chalk out. I don't know if it's the lighting here, but this one looks like it sees it a little bit, where they just get kind of mottled over time. Sometimes that's a factor of just sort of impact of stones and stuff over time. A lot of times it's due to UV. And so a lot of people ask about that. You can polish the lenses, but once you polish them the first time, the time it takes for them to return back to the sort of oxidized state is shorter each time you polish them. So you're kind of playing a losing game. Eventually you'll end up replacing them. And unfortunately, the lenses on these cars it's a whole headlight assembly. So you'll be buying the whole thing. There's not a good way to separate, for example, the lens from the assembly. Other thing people get real worked up in this generation, of course, is original paint or not. You can find a lot of information about that, depending on whether that matters to you. This is really the first era where paint protection film was fairly widespread. Dealers had kind of entered the game and were, selling film in the finance office. So you'll find a lot of them have had film.
So this has paint protection on the bumper. It looks like on the fenders and on the hood, and I believe there's paint or lens protection film on the headlights as well.
Yeah, and that may be actually what's showing some of that, and it may just be the photos too. But and so sometimes you want to be looking for that kind of stuff. But the other thing as it relates to paint protection film is that paint protection film does have a lifespan. And so now that these cars are going on 10, 11, 12 years old, if it has the original paint protection film, I would highly suggest you get it off.
Yeah, because now they're yellowed and the adhesive is probably starting to get hard, right?
Well, exactly. And once they start to become brittle, they become very, very hard to get off. And then you run the risk of peeling paint. And so, it's done its duty. And yeah, it's not fun to spend the money to peel it off and redo it. But your car will thank you for it.
Is this a upgraded headlight, or is this the standard all 997.2?
This is the standard headlight. 997.2's all got bi-xenons as standard equipment. Most 997.1s had it as an option, but it was standard by the time the 2 came around. But the styling of the lens itself and the whole projector design is different for the .2 than the .1. And in fact, this is my controversial opinion. I think actually aesthetically the original 997 headlights and taillights is more elegant and will age better, but that's my opinion.
I would agree. Now, if we move towards the center of this fender, I love these wheels. I mean, I know it's just an aesthetic thing, but these are one of the most handsome wheels that Porsche has designed. I just love this style, and it's also very easy.
What's interesting about those wheels too is those wheels were available on the 997.1 and the .2, which is sort of funny because one of the big changes too is they totally redesigned all the wheel options. But they did carry over a couple of them. But that one was still optional. That was never a standard wheel on a .2, but you could get it.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah.
And as we talked earlier, this does not have center lock wheels, and it does not have ceramic brakes, which is perfect for someone that's planning to use the car at the track a lot.
Yes.
So you, I think you said, I don't know if you said it on when we've been live, but you said earlier that finding a vehicle that has center lock delete is one pretty rare, but then also with ceramic brakes or standard brakes over ceramic brakes, like, do you have a preference? Like, would you say, ooh, this car is a much better buy because it has ceramics, or would you say, ooh, this is a much better buy because it doesn't have ceramics?
It depends on its use case. So for me, I'm a clean freak. And so for me, I love carbon brakes, mostly because I just hate cleaning wheels. I love cleaning cars. I hate cleaning wheels. And so it's the dumbest reason to spend $8,200, but to me it's worth it because you just don't get all the brake dust. And, modern Porsche brake pads, as we all know, if you own one, you come to the first stop sign and your your wheels are black. They just throw off a lot of brake dust. And so I like that. But yeah, if I was going to be tracking a car, or if I was thinking about purchasing a 997 that had carbon brakes and the car had, say, 100,000 miles on it, I might be a little bit anxious about that because the cost to remedy or repair a carbon brake car is very significant.
And the thing about
for a low mileage garage queen Concours car, give me carbons. For higher mileage or a track car, give me steels.
So with carbon brakes, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, visually, it's probably hard to tell if your carbon ceramic brakes need to be replaced because they look kind of the same. I think isn't it by weight of the rotors and such that will determine whether or not it needs to be replaced?
Yeah, the dealer has like a little tool that measures them. And basically says how much wear surface is left. But you're right. Unlike a traditional rotor where you'll actually start seeing it getting a lip, and you'll be able to say it's kind of worn out. But you still can inspect the pads just like you would on a steel brake car.
Yeah,
and you can replace pads on a PCCV car before you replace the rotors, as long as the rotors still measure within spec.
Right. I guess what you're saying is the fear is you don't want to be caught with the hot potato when you have to replace all 4 ceramic brake rotors.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, so we're walking past the fenders. Windshield, definitely, obviously you can tell that was on the track. It's a little bit pitted, no big deal. Mirrors also wrapped. Doors look good. And as I'm looking at the doors, I know we had talked about some models of 911s that have like a door separation on the door panel, and this does not have it. Does this car not have that problem?
No, so that's the 991.1 and 981s that were affected.
Okay.
Essentially, it's an issue with the manufacturing process and the adhesive that they use. But yeah, this generation doesn't suffer that. I mean, the really only issue you think with the cars that they do suffer, and all cars, frankly, water-cooled modern Porsche do, it's issues with the window regulator. As they wear over time, they oftentimes don't drop enough to do that little window drop, so they clear the little gasket there at the top.
Yep.
So if you're ever inspecting one, just grab the door handle, make sure it drops. And as they wear out, they'll still drop, but they don't drop oftentimes enough. And so make sure it drops the little requisite.
Right, and it's not a big deal when you open the door. It's when you close it and you see the glass almost bend that freaks you out.
Yeah. And there isn't, a lot of people think, oh, you can make an adjustment. No, the adjustment is a new window regulator, which isn't the end of the world. It's just dollars that you're going to spend.
So now that we're looking at the interior, I kind of chuckle because you had mentioned the keypad on the earlier PCMs, and here I see a slot for a SIM card. When was the last time anyone ever put a SIM card into their radio on a Porsche?
God bless the Germans. They refuse to make good cup holders, and they always want to be 3 generations behind on their tech. But you know what? I can't kick them too hard because where it matters, which is in the engine compartment, they got the business figured out. So I'll cut them some slack for crappy, radio and stuff.
But you know what? The interior of this car is also very clean. It's not busy at all, and which I like about the steering wheel itself. There's no buttons on it. There's no radio buttons. There's no cruise control buttons. It's just the steering wheel and then the pull paddles for the gears. I like that simplicity. Same thing with the dashers. There's the normal collection of buttons on the center stack. But other than that, the center console is fairly button free, and the rest of the dash is just gauges and no other things to distract you. I like that.
Yeah, a couple things. One, a multifunction steering wheel was an option. So you will find some that do a multifunction wheel. But yeah, this is the last generation of Porsche that does not have the now commonplace rising center console architecture that first was introduced with the Panamera, right? And now every modern Porsche has that. So the center console rises at a 30-degree angle, and you've got a whole slew of buttons. I prefer this more traditional layout, and I think this is actually one of the reasons that the marketplace really looks favorably on the 997.2.
I mean,
Sort of the
you can
end.
clearly see how this is a descendant of, a F body or G body car. Like the feel, the slopes, the rises, it's very familiar.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So how about yeah, I'm looking up here headliner wise. This is has because it's a GTS, I believe that's why it has a lot of Alcantara. Are there in the used car market? Is there any issues? One with the Alcantara, or two, do headliners droop in these cars?
Yeah, good question. So actually, all 997s have Alcantara headliners,
Oh,
unless
really?
they were specified with something different.
Oh,
Um, but unlike 987 cars, which have issues with droopy headliners, actually, well, not cars, I should say Caymans, because of course a Boxer is a different animal. But yeah, this generation, I've never seen a droopy headliner in one of these. And
oh,
I'm
that's
not
good to know.
sure what the difference is, but you just don't see them.
Now, were there different audio? I'm looking at the center stack again. Were there different audio options for this generation car?
Yeah, so basically there was just two choices. There was the standard setup, and then there was the Bose. The vast majority, I mean, probably 90% of the cars out there have the Bose system,
Okay,
which,
so this
yeah,
predates like a Burmeister system.
yeah, Burmeister debuted to make it confusing, 2012 and a half, the 991.1. Yeah.
Oh, okay, gotcha. All right, so let's keep walking down the end here. Now we're at the business end, and which you were so happy to, give up anything that they might progress on the audio side, but the heart is where it's at. Tell us a little bit about this engine, or the engines that
Yeah,
come into
so again,
997.2.
981.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a completely redesigned motor, 3.6 liter in the base and Carrera 4 models, 3.8 liter. But again, how they achieved that 3.8 liter is slightly different. It actually has a shorter stroke than the outgoing 997.1 3.8 liter. And so how that feels in use is it just feels revier. It's got a higher red line. And so coupled with the additional power, when you drive the cars, to me, the biggest change, obviously if you're driving a manual, the biggest change would be the motor, the character of the motor changes. The audio soundtrack is slightly different. Although funny enough, I like the character, I'm splitting hairs here, but I like the character of the 997.2 motor, how it feels revier at the top. But I actually like the soundtrack of the .1 better.
Interesting.
Sort of an interesting one, but
So one of the things that this may sound silly, but the fact that you can still see the motor in a 997, I think that's cool. And here you have the oil filter and oil fill, like it's still very accessible as opposed to the modern day cars, right?
oh yeah, I mean, in fact, if people say, well, why would I pick one of those? If you're a Concours competitor, buy a 991. It makes your life so much easier. All you
Yeah.
have to do is clean the fan. Um, yeah, but to me, it's a silly thing, but it's sort of nice just to be able to see a little bit of the engine and feel like, yeah, as an enthusiast, like, oh, there's my oil filter, and I can check my fluids, and I can do that. And, well, you certainly can do that on 991. It just feels bizarre that you don't actually get to see anything.
Exactly. All right. Well, that was a cool little tour of Diane's car. And again, thank you, Diane, for bringing it in. Let's talk about the many variations of .2 997s, and then maybe your picks of what are the most desirable of them.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, you'd be a pretty darn good enthusiast if you could name every model they built, because there are so many. But the basic lay of the land is you have three basic body configurations that made all the way through: coupe, Targa, and cabriolet. Then, of course, so once you picked a body configuration, then from there you picked drive configuration. So you went, two-wheel drive rear or all-wheel drive. The only derivation would be the Targa was only available in the 4, right? They didn't make a two-wheel drive Targa. And then from there, you then get to pick, okay, which submodel do you want? Do you want a base model car? And you could have a base model or a base model 4, so Carrera 4. You could have a Carrera S or a 4S, right? And then, of course, you have your GTS model, and you have a Carrera GTS and a Carrera 4 GTS.
Oh,
So, yeah, it gets to be a pretty funny mix. And they're all great. I mean, I don't have one that would say, let's best avoid that model. No, not at all. First off, I would say select the body configuration that you like. The Targa is by far the rarest variant by a wide margin. And the Targa are kind of, more than anything, I like the fact they have a hatchback. I think that's kind of cool.
So that's an all glass top, glass hatch that the glass slides into the back, but then also you can open the rear.
Yeah.
Quite unique.
If nothing else, I'm a clean freak. I hate cleaning the inside rear window on a 911. So, man, do you appreciate cleaning the window on a Targa? It's a beautiful thing. So the other thing that's interesting to note is that all Targas are wide bodies, and the reason that is that all Targas are full drive. And so, unlike in previous gens, if you get a 4, it's always a wide body. So if you got, for example, a base Carrera 4, now this is true in the 997.1 as well, but it's a wide body. So a lot of people say, I got to have an S because I want the wide fenders. I'm like, well, actually, believe it or not, a 2S, even though it's an S, is not a wide body, but a base 4 is.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Huh. There's a lot of confusion around that. The only two-wheel drive, normally aspirated wide body car you could get is a GTS. Mm-hmm. That got the wide body work, but rear drive. And that's a Carrera 4 GTS. So again, with center locks, if you see in that photo you just put up.
So is there a very large difference in driving dynamic between a 2-wheel drive versus 4-wheel drive variant?
Well, how do I put this politely? You know what? I'm the star today, so I'm going to be less polite. I've desperately always wanted to do I'm showing my age, but the Pepsi challenge we used to have at the mall back in the day.
Oh, yeah. Pepsi challenge. I remember that.
Test which one's which. Everyone says the same thing. Like if they drive a 4, it's some derivation. They're like, well, the steering just feels a little polluted. It feels a little heavier. There's a little more understeer. A true Porsche should be rear-wheel drive, right? And I always laugh at that because if you understand how the all-wheel drive system works in these cars, it's so unobtrusive that I would argue the average driver cannot tell. So I would love to do a test where I badged a 2 as a 4 and a 4 as a 2, and then ask people their opinion, and I guarantee that they tell me is the 2.
We should.
Oh yeah, the 2 feels heavier and it understeers more.
Nathan,
I'm just.
Nathan, I think that's a great idea.
I think at the end of the day, most people buy the 4 because they want the wide body.
Yeah, but I think you're onto something. I think we need to talk to Damon and Manny and see how we can do that taste challenge, C2 versus C4, and that would be really interesting to see if people could tell. The only thing I think that I would maybe be able to tell is that maybe there's more mass in the front of the car, and if it was less than ideal conditions, if the car pulls through a corner or something like that, that you feel the advantage of an all-wheel drive. But that would be a cool challenge. We got to figure out how to do that.
Yeah, I would say if you drive the cars in the wet or any kind of slippery conditions with any kind of aggressive nature, then it is very apparent that they feel different. Yeah. But in a dry condition, no. I mean, who's kidding who here?
Yeah. So are there any specific options on a 997 that you would say you got to have it?
Options are highly preferential. So I always tell people when you go to a restaurant, they have a menu for a reason. What you would order is different than what I would order. It's not good or bad. Just get what you want. I will say in terms of the market, there are certain options that the market views more favorably. Uh-huh. And so basically in terms of pecking order for option, generally the highest sort of demand or ROI for options centers around performance. So any performance related option really brings the biggest premium. So that would be, the power kit, kind of like Diane's car came with. That would be a big one. Sport exhaust would be a big one. Wheel upgrades, certain wheel upgrades would be desirable. Sport seats, the adaptive sport seats would be very desirable. Or in this generation, you could get the carbon buckets. Pretty rare in a non-GT or non-turbo car, but they are out there. So those would bring a big premium. So, and then the other options that people generally like, Full leather, I think, like I probably wouldn't want one without full leather. To me, they just look a lot richer with full leather, and there really isn't a weight penalty to it. So why would I not want it? So that generally kind of gets me going. Other stuff, again, it's just sort of preferential. Color, of course, makes an enormous difference.
I was just going to say that color, because I've noticed a lot of the photos that we've been sharing, it's like silver, black, very standard colors. There was a few photos of a Speedster that had a very unique blue, but most 997s I've seen are kind of a standard palette.
Yeah. So real quick, because we're showing it, that color on the Speedster is called Pure Blue. It was reserved exclusively for the 997.2
That's a
Speedster.
gorgeous color. Gorgeous color.
And it's not been made available again. So it's exclusive to that car. So that's a very cool color. But one thing that is interesting about the 997.2 is that Porsche got a little more playful with their palette of colors. If there's one gripe I have with the 997.1 is that the color palette was pretty conservative. There's very few kind of exciting colors. There's a few, but not a ton. A lot of silvers, grays, and blacks. And then in the Dot 2, they introduced a bunch of interesting colors like Ipanema Blue.
Oh, yeah.
Pretty cool color.
Nordic Gold.
They have Ruby Red came out. Macadamia came out. What's the gold, orangey gold color? I'm losing my mind here. Anyway, Nordic Gold.
Yep.
But one of the things you got to think about is that even though they offered a bunch of these colors, imagine if you are a dealer and it's 2011 and you have a dealer in Phoenix, Arizona, where half the houses are empty, and you're ordering cars for inventory. You're not going to take a lot of flyers. So you're going to order cars. You're going to order Arctic Silver, Black, Premium Package Plus, PDK.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Because it's an easy sell. You're not going to take a risk and order a manual Ipanema Blue with black wheels and a Carrera Red interior.
Yeah.
Even though now we think, man, that would be a cool combo. Most dealers were like, too risky.
Too risky. Here's a little tip. I don't know how true. Maybe you can weigh in on it. Arthur Rosenberg wrote in and said, don't get carbon fiber interior. It cracks and peels. Is that true?
Yes. So both the carbon and the wood trim options do not fare well anytime they're exposed to significant sun and weather. Or even sometimes it's humidity related. I've seen some pretty low mileage cars. So if you're shopping for a car that has extensive carbon, it's not such a big deal like the dash trim strips or a couple small pieces of carbon, but the bigger issues are the steering wheel, the center console, if you have the entire center console in carbon, as well as if you have the top of the dash up near where the sport chrono, like across underneath the windscreen, you can get a trim piece in carbon or wood up there. And those will fail. And that's been true since the 996 generation. So you want to inspect for that because it's a pretty expensive endeavor to either remedy it, those parts aren't available from Porsche, or to switch them back to just a standard trim.
Now, one addition that I've seen before, but I can't imagine, I don't remember seeing many of them in person, which were like, I think there was an all-white version, but then there was also like a black edition.
Yep. So in 2012, they made a car called the Black Edition. It was a base model Carrera. And again, Porsche is very famous for this. As a general rule, almost always on the very final year of a car, it's probably, they may have a meeting between product planning and ordering and suppliers and go, okay, what do we have a lot of that we need to put into something? And then the design team is tasked with, okay, create a car that uses these 10 parts that we have too much of. I mean, I could be wrong, but I think that's kind of sometimes what happens. And again, sales were kind of tough. And so, but as a consumer, those are oftentimes good deals because they package them in such a way you get a kind of a desirable mix of options, but it's sold at a discount. My only issue with the Black Edition cars, frankly, was they're only black. And so
but didn't they
don't grab a lot of people because they're a cool package, but not that distinct.
Didn't they have an all-white one too, or was that the Boxster Caymans?
The Boxster had the Design Edition.
Design Edition, that's what I'm thinking of. Okay.
Yeah, and those, the Boxster and Caymans had, the Boxster was the white one, the Cayman was black. But
Here's a question from Brad W. What are your thoughts on the reliability of the targa mechanism in the 997.2?
Yeah, so of course that style target debuted for the 993, and it suffered a lot of issues in the first iteration of the 993, and that carried over to the 996, and then again in the 9971, and then in the .2. It's actually proven to be pretty good. It's certainly, anytime you go with a cabriolet or a targa, you have more moving parts and pieces than you would in a coupe, so you're always going to have more potential risk. But I don't see an inordinate amount in the way I did, for example, on the 993s. The 993 always freaks me out because if you read the factory service manual, believe it or not, when it said if your roof gets stuck and you couldn't remedy it, the solution in the factory manual was to break the glass. Yeah.
So that's quite an endeavor.
That's a little scary.
Yeah. So we're talking about, in my eyes, a very modern car, but this is an interesting question: is do these cars suffer from any kind of rust issues?
Well, certainly any car can suffer rust if in the right environment. But overall, as a brand, Porsche really, since the late 1970s, has really done a pretty unbelievably great job of rust proofing their cars. And so the first question I would always have would be, one, I trust a car that was built and assembled by Porsche. I get nervous when I have a car that suffered accident and collision damage, because oftentimes that's where you introduce the possibility, because usually the body shop, they're getting a cut rate deal from the insurance company. I'm not blaming the body shop. It's just, they're getting paid very minimally. And so oftentimes they're repairing what people see, and they're not remedying, the various coatings and, rubberized undercoatings and the various things, or protecting from water intrusion. And so sometimes a car that wouldn't have suffered an issue, you'll see an issue because it's had some repair. So if I was going to live somewhere where rust was an issue, which in our country is generally, New England, upper Midwest, places where they still use, significant de-icing chemicals and salt, or Canada, of course, has got issues with that, then I would want a car that really hadn't suffered any, significant collision damage just for that reason. But yeah, I wouldn't lose any sleep about using one in one of those places. And most of the rust you'll find on cars of this era will be what I call inconsequential. It's ugly, like the fasteners on the exhaust and those kinds of things will show surface scale. But I can't tell you I've ever seen like a 997 with actually perforated body panels.
That's good news. So
Yeah.
the last one that I want to address is, what were the color combinations on the interior of the 997s, and were there ones that wore better or wore out worse?
Yeah. So one thing about Porsche, they've always offered a whole slew of interior colors. And so, I complain about their ability to make a cup holder, but I want to give them absolute kudos. One of my favorite things about Porsche is that the interior color is always unlinked from the exterior. Unlike, for example, Japanese cars, if you order a particular trim level, or an exterior color, then it mandates the interior color, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the cool thing is you can get anything you want. So of course, black would be the standard. Most of the cars are black, probably, 50% or something. The good news about black is it's always in vogue. Black is never out of style.
Yep.
It's not always the most interesting color, but it holds up well. It hides some of the sins. Probably your next most common colors would be, the sand beige. That color, and actually Rob Sath did an interesting article on how to touch up that interior color. I think you can find that in some of the PCA archives. That color, for whatever reason, tends to show a lot of chipping around things like the where the key goes in, around the door window switches, like the center console. Like if you drop your phone or your keys on it, it'll take little chunks out of it, and it can be kind of unsightly, but it can actually touch up fairly well. So, and the other thing is light color carpets, of course, show more grime than a darker carpet. So that color is pretty common. Of course, we have gray. Gray seems to hold up better than the tan, but the carpets suffer the same issue. And in the marketplace, the tan and gray interior cars tend to be a little bit of a harder sell. And then you have your more unique colors, your Carrera red, which is I'm personally in love with. If anyone's seen some of my cars in my collection, I have several with the red interior. I do love that. They do, of course, have the brown interior, which I think is super, super sexy. One wear issue I do see with both the red and the brown interior colors is the carpet tends to fade out, particularly like in the coupes below the rear window or in the cabriolets in the rear seat area. And that looks kind of unsightly. So the carpet ends up turning kind of a pink hue, which I don't like. So neither here nor there. But yeah, so lots of great choices interior-wise. They did a good job with that.
Well, I don't know if you guys could hear the sirens that are playing outside, but it's our cue that we're at the top of the hour. There's a couple of things I wanted to mention as we wrap up. We just dropped a few videos on YouTube, 360 plus Porsches on the boards at Ocean City, New Jersey, Boardwalk Reunion. Check out that video. Damon did a video on a beautiful 993 Cabriolet. That's we've kind of coined the name Kermit. We have Unstock coming November 13th in Burbank, California. If you haven't registered your car, unfortunately we've sold out in terms of display cars, but you can certainly come out as a spectator. We would love to see you. We have an amazing agenda planned for the day. And then a couple days later, we will be at the LA Auto Show, also a sold out program, taking about 290, 300 PCA members through the Porsche booth. The PCA raffle for the America Edition GTS is now live. We actually have the one allocation available out of the 115 cars that are actually being produced. Let's see, podcast number 33 just recently dropped, and we're on podcast 34. So if you haven't checked out PCA Insider, do so. And then finally, Tech Tactics episode 60, we're going to be talking about winter break Porsche projects. Cool things that you can do, even if you live in good weather, but maybe the driving season is a little bit of a lull, or the holidays and such, and you want to still do some fun stuff in your garage. We'll be talking about a number of projects there. And so with that, I want to thank Diane, I want to thank Nathan, I want to thank all of you that are watching live tonight on Wednesday, and Nathan, of course, great seeing you, buddy. Till next time.